In July 1943 at Camp Hearn, Texas, the first group of 500 German prisoners of war arrived by train from the New York port of embarkation. These soldiers had been captured during the final stages of the Tunisia Campaign in May, when 275,000 Axis troops surrendered to the Allies. Among them were men from the Deutsches Afrikakorps, who had fought under General Erwin Rommel in the deserts of North Africa. They were seasoned soldiers, mostly from the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, experienced in battle from Tobruk to El Alamein. Dressed in dusty field grey uniforms, they arrived under the watchful eyes of the 91st Infantry Division. Following the Geneva Convention, the men assembled in neat ranks, where their Feldwebel, sergeant, called roll. Their first stop was a Quonset hut for processing. Here they were deloused, checked by doctors, and given identification tags. Afterward, they were assigned to wooden barracks in one of 3 fenced compounds, each holding 1,200 men. The barracks were small, with only 40 square feet of space per prisoner and steel bunks. The camp operated on a strict routine, overseen by Captain Robert Devore. Life was disciplined but also adhered to the Geneva-compliant provisions, which offered a stark contrast to the prisoners' previous experiences. The day began at 5 a.m. with réveillé, followed by a simple breakfast of oatmeal, white bread and coffee, a luxury compared to their usual wartime rations of hardtack and dried peas. By 7 a.m., prisoners were assigned to labor details on nearby cotton and peanut farms, where they worked for 80 cents a day, performing tasks like loading bales onto wagons pulled by international harvester tractors. After their workday, the prisoners had some free time to enjoy recreation. They played soccer on graded fields with Red Cross balls or watched newsreels in the camp's theater, showing footage of the Sicily invasion. Despite the camp's peaceful environment, the guards, such as Sergeant Harlan Jenkins, patrolled with Springfield rifles, ensuring that the rules were followed while also allowing the Wehrmacht hierarchy to keep order within the camp. However, the German prisoners were surprised by how the guards treated them. They had expected the usual harshness of their enemies, the cruelty they had been warned about by Nazi propaganda, but instead they were met with unexpected kindness. The American guards, though armed, treated them with a degree of respect and civility that completely caught them off guard. At first, the prisoners were suspicious. They thought the guards' behavior was a trap, a psychological trick. They expected to be humiliated or abused, but as the days passed, they began to realize that the Americans were following the Geneva Convention, treating them fairly and humanely. This was a shock to them, as they had been conditioned to view the Allies as ruthless. Some even whispered, "Are they planning to kill us later?" But nothing happened. Captain Devore's after-action plan aimed to ensure that the prisoners were given a fair and structured environment. Meals were always on time, and though simple, they were much better than the starvation rations the POWs had been used to. For the first time in months, the prisoners felt full and nourished. Even more surprising, there was no physical punishment for breaking camp rules. The men had expected brutality, but instead, they were treated like soldiers. This humane treatment started to chip away at their trust in Nazi propaganda. By August, the camp population had grown to 5,000, powered by diesel generators for floodlights and artesian wells for cold showers. For these prisoners, who had previously fought under the blistering sun of the desert, the camp offered something unexpected, a life of relative abundance, free from the harsh punishments they feared. As the heat of August settled over the Brazos River Valley, daily life at Camp Hearn became routine, but idleness began to breed unrest among the experienced soldiers from the Afrika Korps. To prevent this, Captain Devore approved a special recreational outing to expose the prisoners to American civilian life and subtly undermine the Nazi ideology they had been taught. The Special Projects Division had long supported such outings as a way to re-educate prisoners and weaken their attachment to Nazism. During the Guards patrols, stories about the annual Hearn Rodeo, held every Labor Day since 1920, caught the interest of the German prisoners. The rodeo featured bull riding and calf roping, and was a big event at the fairgrounds just 5 miles east of the camp. Prisoners began whispering about the rodeo, speculating that it might reveal something about the Yankee frontier tactics that had helped the Allies outmaneuver their panzer divisions at Gazala. For the September 4th outing, Captain DeVore selected 50 prisoners, focusing on those with clean records. Among them were Feldwebel Karl Lehmann, a mechanic from Munich, and Obergefreiter Otto Klein, a radio operator from Dresden. At 9 a.m., they were driven in 2 flatbed trucks with 10 armed escorts carrying M1 rifles but no bayonets, a measure meant to ease the tension. The short ride passed through fields of cotton, dotted with smaller camps like Camp Bowie, where similar work details toiled. Captain DeVore's after-action plan to the War Department included a psychological adjustment component, exposing prisoners to American individualism that contrasted with the Wehrmacht's rigid command structure. As the trucks rumbled toward the rodeo arena, the prisoners, still clinging to their militarized mindset, prepared for a glimpse into enemy ingenuity, not knowing they were about to experience a spectacle that would upend their assumptions about their captors' supposed softness. On September 4, 1943, at the Herne Rodeo Grounds 5 miles east of Camp Herne, 2 flatbed trucks came to a stop on a gravel apron beside the main gate. They unloaded 50 German prisoners of war, who were greeted by the midday heat of the Robertson County Fairgrounds. The fairgrounds, covering 100 acres, were surrounded by a split-rail fence, a feature dating back to the rodeo's beginning in 1920. Around 2,000 spectators filled the area, with farmers in faded denim, housewives fanning themselves with rodeo programs, and children perched on their parents' shoulders for a better view. The German prisoners were herded into a roped-off section of bleachers, halfway up the east stands. They were given tin cups of lemonade mixed with well water and passed sticks of jerked beef from a vendor's cart pulled by a mule named Sadie. The prisoners sat silently, taking in the strange sight. The 10 guards, led by Sergeant Harlan Jenkins, sat nearby with their M1 Garand rifles resting across their knees. The guards exchanged looks with the locals, who were curious, yet cautious about the prisoners. The Herne Democrat, the town's weekly newspaper, had run a story in advance, describing the supervised visit as a community gesture during the cotton harvest. The rodeo began at 11 a.m., with the national anthem blaring through a megaphone, which was connected to a Chevrolet pickup's battery. The prisoners, who were used to standing at attention in military formation, stood rigidly, heels together, while the crowd sang off-key. The first event was bull riding, the traditional opener. 8 contestants drew numbers from a Stetson hat held by the MC, a local banker named Roy Caldwell, who wore a bow tie and suspenders. The riders cinched their flanks with spurs and coated their palms with pine tar from 5-gallon buckets. They climbed into 8-foot chutes, where Brahma cross bulls like Outlaw, a massive black bull from the Matador Ranch with a horn span of 60 inches, stomped impatiently on the slatted floor. When the latch released, the bull exploded in a clockwise spin. The rider, Tom Hale, a 28-year-old from nearby Calvert, gripped a manila bull rope tied through a leather flank strap, which inflated as the bull bucked. Hale held on for 6 seconds, enduring the bull's head tosses and wild rolls, before he was thrown into the dirt. He quickly rolled clear as pickup men on sorrel geldings flanked the bull with lassos to guide it off the field. The timer, a retired railroad conductor, declared Hale's ride a success, awarding him 12 points out of a possible 100 for control and exposure. At this, Sergeant Fritz Haus, a tank commander from the 21st Panzer Division, leaned forward and whispered to his comrade, "Cavalry maneuver training. See how they extract the operative under enemy fire simulation?" The prisoners' responses were measured, based on the training they had received at the Afrika Korps Gazala headquarters. Feldwebel Karl Lehmann, sitting at the aisle with Obergefreiter Otto Klein, pulled a stub pencil from his pocket and began sketching the bull's movements on a folded ration wrapper. He annotated the angles in Gothic script. Cavalry dismount under fire. Note operative's leg extension for stability amid rotational stress. One nearby guard overheard and later recalled, "One Kraut leans over and whispers to his buddy, 'Secret Yankee drill. See the precision.'" I nearly busted a gut laughing. As the rodeo continued, the next event was bronco riding, with 10 entries split between bareback and saddle bronc. The riders faced outlaws like Widowmaker, a grey Mustang from the Frying Pan Ranch known for its wild sun-fishing leaps. The riders, including Jess Ford, wrapped their gloved hands around the suicide wrap on the handle, a neoprene loop attached to the flank. The gate flew open, and Ford was launched backward in a frog-tail buck, a move that tested the Bronc's ability to change direction mid-air. Ford lasted 8 seconds, finishing with a flourish that drew loud cheers from the crowd. To the German prisoners, however, this wasn't a display of skill or sport. They saw it as a mount failure simulation for reserve mechanized units. One Unteroffizier compared the rider's counterweight shift to the stabilizing actions of a Flak 38 anti-aircraft gun during a Stuka dive. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a Luftwaffe junior officer, added, "Their horses buck like panzers under fire. Surely this is reserve cavalry exercise for their weekend warriors." Major Edward P. Kirby, observing from the press box as part of the camp's oversight, noted in his report, "The German officers watched the Bronco rides as if decoding enigma, embedded combat prep in leisure, clever psi warfare." Their awe was palpable. The next event, calf roping, caught the prisoners' attention as well. The teams entered the arena at a lope, their horses coming to a sliding stop on their hindquarters, shod with steel corks. The cowboy built slack in his 15-foot nylon rope before throwing it in a figure-8 motion. The flanker tripped the calf with a heel catch and tied it in 7 seconds. Obergefreiter Klein leaned toward Lehmann, whispering, "Precision reconnaissance bind. Autonomous equine positioning rivals our Kubelwagen four-wheel drive without throttle input." Corporal Franz Burmeister, sitting further down the bench, added quietly, "Reconnaissance and capture techniques. Notice the coordination between rider and mount. The horse knows to maintain rope tension without command." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows from the grandstand's corrugated tin roof, the barrel racing and steer wrestling capped the competitive events of the day. For the German prisoners, it added more variables to their assessments, deepening their curiosity about American life. The women's barrel racing event began first, with 5 riders qualifying through time trials the night before. They navigated a course of 3 55-gallon barrels, arranged in a cloverleaf pattern. Betty Lou Grimes drew the pole position on her bay quarter horse, a 9-year-old gelding named Smokey. With his blaze markings and stocking feet, he was a beauty. Grimes entered the arena at a gallop from the alleyway, skillfully guiding Smokey with inside spurs and a leftward rein flick to circle the first barrel. She powered out in a right lead lope, her boot heels ticking the stirrup leathers in rhythm as she approached the second barrel. She clocked 24 seconds, edging the competition by half a second. The crowd watched in silence as the dust settled. Her clean turns, without clipping any barrels, boosted her score, judged by a panel of 3 locals using stopwatches synced to the rodeo's clock tower. The German prisoners shifted uncomfortably, clearly surprised. An Oberfeldwebel in the back row crossed his arms and muttered to his neighbor, "Auxiliary supply evasion embedded in domestic training, efficient yet unseemly for the fairer element." Corporal Elias Ramirez, one of the guards, overheard and chuckled, recalling later, "They analyzed every flip like it was Enigma code. Barrel racing broke them. Women warriors? We let them think it a bit for the laughs." Feldwebel Karl Lehmann, however, paused his notations, watching Grimes dismount with a wave to the applauding housewives. Her participation went unchallenged by any hierarchy or military decree, a contrast to the Luftwaffe's segregated auxiliary corps back in Tripoli. Lehmann couldn't help but feel a shift in his thinking, even if he wasn't fully aware of it at the time. The next event, steer wrestling, was the finale before the intermission, and it ramped up the physical intensity. 4 hazers on paint ponies positioned a 1,000-pound Texas Longhorn in the arena. The steer had dewlap folds and curved lyre horns, and was set loose into the 100-foot box of the arena. Big Jim Harlan, a 220-pound competitor from the Keechee Creek Ranch, with a handlebar mustache and tattoos from the Civilian Conservation Corps, was the first to go. As his sorrel horse galloped, he vaulted from the saddle mid-stride, grabbing the left horn and underjaw of the steer in a cross-face grip. With one powerful movement, he drove his right heel into the steer's flank for leverage. The animal flipped sideways in just 4 seconds, its legs kicking skyward. Harlan pinned its nose to the dirt with his free hand, the hazer slapping the steer's flank to signal completion. The crowd erupted in applause for the quick and efficient effort. Harlan tipped his hat as the other bulldoggers patted him on the back. To the German prisoners, it reminded them of close-quarters anti-vehicle tactics, with one Gefreiter comparing the heel hook to a sapper's tripwire on a Goliath remote-controlled demolition charge. In the midst of the applause, Professor Ernst Fromm, an academic among the group, ventured, "What if this isn't military training at all? What if Americans simply enjoy watching dangerous activities, much like we might attend a football match or boxing exhibition?" Intermission brought some relief. A fiddler on a flatbed stage played Turkey in the Straw on a Martin guitar strung with steel E-strings. At the same time, concession stands sold foil-wrapped tamales and cups of Arbuckle's coffee, which brewed over sterno flames. Sergeant Jenkins, walking through the crowd with a plug of chewing tobacco, answered questions from the prisoners using phrases from his pocket phrasebook. "No, not army, farm boys, weekends only," he explained. The prisoners, who had expected a much harsher environment, began to feel the first cracks in their worldview. Jenkins's words, as simple as they were, felt like distant thunder. For the first time, the German soldiers were seeing a side of America they hadn't imagined: freedom, individuality, and a lack of coercion. As the afternoon wore on, the chuck wagon race provided another surprise for the prisoners. This event, more like a logistics race than combat, involved 4 teams of ranch families. Each team lined up antique Studebaker wagons, which were caulked against leaks and loaded with cast-iron Dutch ovens, 40-pound flour sacks, and sideboards of smoked brisket. At the sound of a Smith & Wesson pistol, whips cracked over Percheron teams, harnessed in brass-studded collars. The wagons thundered a quarter-mile loop past figure-8 obstacles of hay bales, finishing with a skid-stop judged on the intactness of cookware. The Caldwell clan, the team sponsoring the event, won the race despite scattering a skillet. They piled out of the wagon to high-five each other, while the horses snorted like engines. The Germans watched, then burst into laughter. It started with a snort from Klein, then full guffaws rippled through the group as Lehman capped his pencil, admitting under his breath, "No fuel rations, no convoy chief, madness for a tin pot and glory." This voluntary danger, without any coercion or discipline, mirrored nothing in their doctrine. There were no demerits for the dropped pan, no court-martial for the spill, just handshakes and $5 purses from a cigar box till. The Germans, accustomed to strict rules, were shocked by the freedom and lack of punishment. The rodeo program wound down with a bronc-pegging exhibition where cowboys roped wild mustangs from horseback in under 2 minutes. By now, the prisoners' posture had eased, and their pencils were stowed. Even the stoic ones couldn't help but smile as clowns lobbed water balloons into the stands, causing reluctant grins. Captain Robert DeVore, reviewing the guards' notes that evening, summarized the shift. The officers went silent at first, analyzing every flip as tactical doctrine. Then one muttered, "No discipline. Madness." It cracked their worldview wide open. Later, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas J. Betts noted in a follow-up evaluation from the Boston port of embarkation, "POWs' faces, pure calculation. This explains their tenacity. No fear of the horse, only the rider's will." By 4 p.m., the arena was raked smooth by a John Deere tractor, and the prisoners reboarded the trucks for the return journey. The air had cooled, with a northerly breeze coming from the Post Oak savanna. On the way back, the prisoners' debates were subdued, their voices overlapping in Low German as they reflected on the day's events. They reinterpreted the experiences. The bull's spin was just sport, not Stuka evasion. The barrel weave was a pastime, not a partisan scout exercise. Otto Hilgenberg jotted in his journal, "Attended second rodeo event. My earlier assumptions about military purpose now seem foolish. They compete on weekends for trophies and modest cash." In a letter home, Ludwig Stein wrote, "These Texans possess a frontier spirit we Germans have forgotten. They value individual courage over collective obedience." Decades later, in a 1983 interview, Heinrich Warner summed up the lasting change. "When I finally understood that these cowboys were not soldiers, I realized I had never truly understood America, a nation where ordinary men voluntarily climb onto bulls for sport. That is not a soft nation. That is perhaps a crazy nation, but not weak." For Lehman and Klein, the rodeo was a turning point. They went from viewing P-51 Mustang pilots as lucky gamblers to recognizing a national grit woven into civilian life. The outing, which was approved for repeats during the 1944 harvest fairs, became a pivotal moment, not just of confinement but of personal transformation, one dust-choked spectacle at a time.